Hello and welcome to this Year 9 lesson explaining why Germany faced so many problems in 1923. This lesson is going to follow on from the lesson in two parts that focused on Germany 1923, the year of crisis. You will need the lesson notes template that goes with this lesson, which you should be able to find in Teams or class charts or on Pod, or you should have it emailed to you, or failing all that, you will find a link to it in the description at the bottom of this video. So, if we remember back to the lessons that we did on Germany 1923, a year in crisis, then we can remember the particularly traumatic nature of 1923 for Germany. It started with an inflationary crisis, which meant that the price of goods was increasing, and then there was a confrontation with France and the other Allied powers over the inability to pay the reparation payments, which led to the French invasion of the Ruhr Valley to take some important industrial plants out of German hands and take the coal and the industry in that area for France directly as reparations, because the Germans were not paying the reparations. This led to the government calling for passive resistance and asking the German people not to go to work and not to work in the factories. French just brought their own workers in, but it also led to the government having to pay people's wages even though they weren't at work. It led to a loss of coal production, a loss of industrial output, and it led to hyperinflation as the government chose to print more and more money, and the inflationary crisis spiraled out of control. And we know that the government had to put in some fairly extreme measures to end the crisis and to get the currency stable again, and that the German people were annoyed about this, felt the government was quite weak and was quite incompetent, and Hitler and the Nazi Party tried to overthrow the government in Munich as a first step. They felt that would be a first step on the way to overthrowing the entire Weimar government, because they were so frustrated at the way the government of Stresemann had dealt with the hyperinflation crisis and the way they felt they'd caved in to the French by calling off resistance and negotiating with them. So we know that the year 1923 in Germany was particularly traumatic for the German people. Right, on page 3 of your lesson note template, you will find this task 1 here, which is the beginning of a map from memory on 1923, the year of crisis. You can see the headings are Weimar Constitution, political instability, and the Treaty of Versailles, and they are maybe long-term problems that fed into the specific problems of 1923, and those specific problems of hyperinflation and the Munich Putsch. There's also a heading there. Now, if you don't have the ability to print this booklet off, or you can't type into it, or it's difficult to do that, then you can simply create this mind map on a blank piece of paper yourself, and you could write the headings on that paper and then try and recall the information in relation to those headings from memory. You will find on the 3 or 4 pages after this page in the lesson notes template some information that will help you to be able to fill in this map from memory, but that wouldn't necessarily be a map from memory if you just use that information straight away. So in a moment, you're gonna pause, and you need to try and fill in as much of this map as you can from memory, the information that you know about these things, and then we will come back to it and see anything that you've missed, and you can add that in using the information that comes after this page in your lesson notes template. So pause this now and off you go. Okay, so welcome back. Hopefully you have had a good stab at doing your map from memory on page 3 of your lesson notes template. And you will see that on the pages that follow, there is information there to help you add in things that you might have missed. I want to concentrate here on how these different things link together. So in a moment, you can add those extra things in that you might have missed, but we need to also think about how these things are connected together. So the problems associated with the Weimar Constitution, the problems with government that produced and the political instability that it led to in the long term had an impact on what was happening in 1923 in the short term, because that lack of faith in the republic, that lack of belief that the Weimar Republic and the system that had been set up was the right government system for Germany, was part of the reason that people lost faith and felt that the government was very weak during the hyperinflation crisis. And it was part of the reason that Hitler and others were motivated to try and take over Munich in the Munich Putsch. And tying this together, undoubtedly, is the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was not solely responsible for hyperinflation. We covered that in part 1 of Germany 1923, a year of crisis lesson. The inflationary crisis was in large part caused by the German government's own monetary policy. But the Treaty of Versailles and the problem of having to pay those reparations was at the root of the hyperinflation crisis, and the French decision to invade the Ruhr was because the Germans were not actually keeping up their payments, reparation payments under the Treaty of Versailles. And we know that Hitler's hatred of the Treaty of Versailles and his dislike of the way that the government had given in to, as he saw it, to the French and called off passive resistance after the French occupied the Ruhr is also linked to the Treaty of Versailles. So these things are interconnected. These problems that Germany had are all connected to the problems of government, the problems associated with the Treaty of Versailles, and the continued political and economic instability in Germany after the First World War. Right, give this a little pause and use the information to add anything into your mind map that you did not get from memory. Answering the 12-mark Explain Why question is a particularly important skill. It appears not only on the Germany paper but also on paper 1 and paper 2. Here is a small video to explain how to do it. Question. So what you're essentially being asked to do here is to explain why something happened, explain the impact of something, explain the consequences of something. So there is an element here in which your analysis comes from considering the relative importance of the reasons that explain what it is that you're being asked to explain. So in this case, why was Hitler able to create a dictatorship in the period February 1933 to August 1934? So you're looking for a number of different reasons why that was able to happen, and your analysis comes from considering what's the relative importance of these different reasons. So a good way to think about this is to think about what your line of argument is that runs through your entire answer. The Mark scheme clearly says that you need to have a clear line of reasoning or line of argument.
So this isn't a magical mystery tour answer where you start off saying one thing and then by the end you say something else. It needs to be a tight, coherent piece of writing which clearly spells out what your argument is, and then throughout the answer you link back to that argument using evidence to support what you are saying. So for an example paragraph here might go something like, one way in which Hitler was able to establish a dictatorship was by exploiting the Reichstag fire to move against his political opponents. So there is a clear point that is focused on the question. The text in green there is the evidence that you're using, so you need some sort of knowledge to support the point that you're making. And then the important bit for showing that you have a consistent line of reasoning is that last sentence, which is in blue, which links back into your line of argument. So you're showing how, in this case, the Reichstag fire was an important element in Hitler's ability to establish a dictatorship, but it wasn't as important as the Enabling Act, which is what you have set out as the most important factor in your line of argument. So in that way, your paragraph links back into your line of argument. That helps the examiner to show that you are focused, and it also helps the examiner to see that you have a clear line of reasoning throughout your answer.
Okay. If you look on page 9 of your lesson notes booklet, you will find this answer to a question: explain why the Nazis were able to reduce unemployment in Germany in the years 1933 to 39. Now, you probably don't know very much about why the Nazis were able to reduce unemployment in Germany in the years 1933 to 39. But in many respects, that's not important. What I want you to think about is what I've just said in that video clip about how to answer a 12-mark question. And I want you to consider what is good about this answer and what is not so good and could be improved. This answer got 8 out of 12, so it's a decent answer, but there's obviously some room for improvement. So what I want you to do in a moment is pause this, read through the answer, think about what you've just seen in the video clip about what makes a good answer, and then I want you, in the little table that appears on page 10 of your lesson notes booklet, or just on a separate piece of paper if you're doing this on separate pieces of paper, can you jot down what's good about this answer and maybe some things that need to be improved? Okay, so let's look at this answer. Explain why the Nazis were able to reduce unemployment in Germany in the years 1933 to 39. One reason the Nazis were able to reduce unemployment in the years 1933 to 39 was because Hitler was rebuilding the army and navy that was reduced as a result of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Hitler was able to reduce the unemployment rate as a result of this, as many people enlisted in the army and navy during this period. If we think about this in relation to what we've just looked at, and if we start to think about what's the point, so the point that's being made in this bit here is that the army and navy being rebuilt was the reason why the unemployment rate was able to be reduced. And if we think about the knowledge that is used to support that, we've got a little bit of knowledge. It's just mainly a reiteration of the point. Okay. Then we've got another reason what the Nazis were able to reduce employment was the formation of the Nazi secret police, the Gestapo, which gave people jobs to hunt down enemies of the Third Reich. So we've got a point here, and then we've got some information about concentration camps. We've got a little bit of supporting evidence. Then we've got, additionally, during this time period, Hitler had made a promise during his campaigning that he would reduce unemployment by creating jobs for people to do labour, such as building roads and buildings, an example being the Olympic Park that was built. So again, we've got the point here. When we start talking about the Olympic Park, we've got a bit of the knowledge and a bit of evidence there. Overall, the Nazis' main way of reducing unemployment was by creating new jobs. We've got some sort of argument here. We've got the overall, it was to create jobs, okay? But you can see despite the good things. So we've got 3 ways in which the Nazis tried to reduce unemployment. We've got 3 key points, and we've got some knowledge. It's not particularly detailed knowledge, but we have some knowledge supporting that. And we have an argument, but the argument comes at the end of the answer. It doesn't start the answer. There isn't a line of argument at the beginning which is then followed through, which means that if you look at the start of the paragraphs, we have one reason, we have another reason, and we have additionally. So what we've really got here is a list of different reasons, and that's fine because the answer is still showing some knowledge and it's still getting to 8 out of 12, but the answer is listing reasons rather than crafting an explanation which is tied together. So there isn't an argument that's tying this thing together. It is mainly an answer which lists different reasons why the Nazis were able to reduce unemployment. So what you now want to do, if you didn't pick up on those points yourself, is you want to look in your lesson notes template, look at page 10, or if you're doing it on a separate piece of paper, just jot down those things about what made a good answer and some of the things that were missing from this answer, which if they'd been there, would have made it better. Okay, so on the last page of your lesson notes template, you have this task 3, which is a question that you're going to do. So we've got explain why Germany faced so many problems in 1923. And we want to start to think about what it was that caused these problems, okay, and what it was that was maybe binding these problems together so that we have a sense of clear argument. So let's start to list some of the things that were important. So we know that the Weimar Republic was weak politically. Oh, there was weak politically. Was weak politically. We can talk about the Weimar Constitution. And its problems. We could also talk about the Treaty of Versailles as an ongoing problem, and we can talk about the hyperinflation crisis, and we can talk about the Munich Putsch. So we've got 4 key things to build our answer around. Now, what we need to do is try and consider which of these things were more important, or rather which of these things are going to drive our answer. So, in my opinion, the thing that was really at the center of the problems in 1923 was the Treaty of Versailles. I think we could argue that the Treaty of Versailles was probably at the center of the problems that the Weimar Republic was facing. However, hyperinflation crisis had causes that weren't entirely created by the Treaty of Versailles. Some of it was to do with the monetary policies of the German government themselves, and we could say the Munich Putsch was not entirely caused by the Treaty of Versailles. It was about the opposition of the Nazis to the way in which the Weimar government dealt with the hyperinflation crisis, and that links to the idea of the Weimar Republic being politically weak. So we could argue that the reason Germany faced so many problems in 1923 was the Treaty of Versailles, but not the Treaty of Versailles solely. However, the thing that bound the different problems together was the feeling that the government had not dealt with the problems of the Treaty of Versailles successfully. So our argument could be that the reason Germany faced so many problems in 1923 was because of the continued difficulties created by the Treaty of Versailles and the problems associated with the Weimar Republic government appearing to be weak and not particularly stable. Our first paragraph could talk about the Treaty of Versailles and the long-term problems it caused for Germany, the economic problems, the humiliation that Germans felt. We could then write a paragraph that showed how the Weimar Republic's government took a lot of blame for the signing of the Treaty of Versailles and was also seen as weak and unstable, and people didn't really trust the constitution and democracy because of the political instability that was caused by it, lots of coalition governments, etc. And we could say that these underlying, that's really important because we're trying to weave our argument together, these underlying long-term problems help to explain the problems that then materialized in 1923, because the hyperinflation crisis, not just inflation, but hyperinflation, was caused by the Weimar government's reaction to the French invading the Ruhr, and the French invaded the Ruhr because the German government were not paying the reparations back that had been stipulated during the Treaty of Versailles. So we're linking back to weak government or unstable government and the Treaty of Versailles. And we could then say that Hitler's Munich Putsch in 1923 was a reaction against the government's methods of dealing with the hyperinflation crisis, and was also a rejection of the Treaty of Versailles and any sense that Germany should be cooperating with the French in stopping passive resistance and allowing them to be in the Ruhr. So what we're doing, which is unlike the answer that we've just looked at, we've got the points and the evidence, we're weaving them together in an argument so that we can say that we have a sustained argument. And our argument is that the long-term problems caused by the Treaty of Versailles and the political weaknesses of the Weimar Republic help to explain why the hyperinflation crisis and the Munich Putsch were such problems in 1923. So, what you're going to do is have a go at answering that question, and you are going to send it to me by the date that I have stipulated in the instructions that I've sent in regards to this lesson. Okay, that brings us to the end of this lesson explaining why Germany faced so many problems in 1923. In the next lesson, we will start to look at the recovery of Germany and the extent to which the German economy, political and social life improved during the middle of the 1920s. Until then, take care, stay safe, goodbye.